Hi everybody and welcome to this video. My name is 𝗕𝗫𝗀𝗀 and in this video I want to walk you through all possible functions and knobs of the 𝗕𝗲𝗀𝗀. So it's basically like the manual but with some actual audio examples, because I think this really helps in order to understand what which function does. Nevertheless, I know from experience that there's always a high chance that I don't mention some particular thing, and in case that's the one thing that you were actually looking for, just don't hesitate to drop any questions in the comments, because I always gladly respond to them. Also, this video is going to be quite technical in terms of the sounds I'm going to show you, because they are purely for demonstration purposes. But if you're interested in some more musical usage of the 𝗕𝗲𝗀𝗀, I'm going to link some playlists that you can find here, where you can find some performances that I regularly post with the 𝗕𝗲𝗀𝗀. Also, be known already that I have a class on Skillshare about learning drums specifically with some small electronic drum pad, and there's a link down below in the description where you can try this class 1 month for free without any strings attached. And also be known that there are some timestamps down below in the description. I'll also try to put them in here for a short while, because this makes it a little easier for you to just find the topic you're looking for, so you don't have to browse through the whole video guessing where you could find it. So after turning on the pad, you start with the A1 kit, because here right now it's on drum kit select. That's always the first setting that you're on after switching it on. And you have different types of banks. So this is bank A, you also have bank B, C, and so on. And they always have like 50 different kits. So if you're not interested in building any sounds from scratch and just want to start playing right away, you can basically do it. If the volume is on and your 𝗕𝗲 is connected to anything that can play the sound, you can just start playing stuff. And yeah, this knob on the left side is like your main navigation knob, because all the time you change some value of any of those settings, you can do it with this big black knob on the left side. For this video though, I decided to create some new kit from scratch, or at least like a new sound, because this way it's way easier for you to understand what any one of those knobs is actually doing. And by default you have like banks A to D filled with kits, and then if you never stored any kits by yourself, it starts in the E section where you can store your own custom kits. I mean, you can also store them on those other positions, but they already contain some stock sound. And I also stored some sounds already, so I know that my empty kits will be somewhere in the F area. And you always recognize them by this type of sound. And if you're looking for modifying one of those stock sounds that I just mentioned, all the things I do right now apply as well. So it doesn't matter if you create something from scratch or edit some kit that already exists. It always does the same thing. But this way it's just easier to show you what those knobs are doing. So if you start creating a sound, you have to choose a pad that you want to start with. And by using those two knobs, you can see where you are, because this red light shows you which pad you're going to edit. And you can just click on this pad to see which one it is. And so we see, okay, let's just edit this pad for now. There's also one option that allows you to edit all pads at the same time, because if you click on Shift and edit all channels, it would mean that once you edit this pad, it just copies the same settings to all the other pads. So if you're going to try making some tuned sounds, you could just find the basic sound first and then later apply different pitches to the individual drums, for example. But we're not going to use this setting for now. So when you start creating a sound, you have two options. You can, for example, just pick a drum, because if you go to drum select, you see right now there's no selected drums, so we could also just go to the tone menu and start creating this sound. But you can also access some stock drums. So they are not only stock kits like I mentioned, but also stock individual drums that, for example, you can use for creating your custom kits. So still you don't have to create any sounds, you can pick the ones that are already here. So if you browse through it, you see like bass drum, you have different bass drums. And then you also arrive at snare. You have toms and hi-hats, cymbals, and some percussion. And also some bell sounds. And also some tuned percussion, as well as some effects. And then you also have some user interface that allows you to store your individual drum sounds. And if you want to create some new sound from scratch, you either don't click on the drum select button once you start the new kit, because if you do it first, you see there's nothing applied, or if you did it already, you can also go to this user interface. So this way you can also just later store it to that position already. And there's a sound already on user interface number 1, so I'm just going to move to number 2. So for designing sounds, the most important section is probably the tone section. So by default, those sounds are always on D1, and I'm going to mention in a second what that means, but it's not the first setting, because if you click on the left side on this button and all the time you press this one, it means that while you turn this wheel, you access the lower parameter, because you always see one parameter in white on the black background and also one parameter with the red background. And once you click this button, you access the one with the red background. And in this case, it means we're on this button here, which means like spectra and wave, and we want to change the waveform, because the waveform is your basic sound. It's like with a synthesizer, and it really defines the main character of your sound. So this part is really important. And you have some classical synthesizer waveforms, which is actually kind of fun because it allows you to create some analog synth type sounds, and they have some A, which stands for analog. So you have a sine wave, some triangle wave. And now you see that on the left side you also get some option. Right now nothing is applied, but if you turn this knob, you can either add values higher than 50 or lower than 50. And with those analog waveforms, it means that it applies some second, it's called oscillator, so some second voice. And if you just do it with the lower amounts of 50, it creates some detuned effect. Or actually still on 60, and at some point it changes to some actual pitches, so you can play intervals. Up to a higher part, and the same just works into the other direction. And you can do the same with some sawtooth wave, some square wave, some other type of square wave. I think this is just filtered already. And also a pulse wave. Although here it gives you the chance to not apply some second oscillator, but to change the pulse width. So you can make the sound thinner. And have this type of option. Then there's something called T-bridge oscillator. It's some other type of, I think, sine wave, but here I'm not very good at explaining it because I didn't understand it yet. It sounds to me like a sine wave type. But if you know more about this oscillator, you're also warmly invited to share in the comments. The first one is just, yeah, it sounds like a sine wave. The second one is a little different from the waveform, and it also gives you the chance to again apply some second oscillator. Then we arrive at the FM section, which has some more crazy sounds, as you can hear. And on the left side you can change the tuning of it. Usually higher values give you this bell type sound. And here you have more this noise distortion. Very ugly sounds also in some ways, but you can also do more with the filter, but we'll arrive there in a second. Let's continue moving through those different banks. The H section creates some harmonics. So you have a basic sound, and then with the on the left menu you can create some additional harmonics that are on top of the sound. Sometimes you also get this kind of pulsing, which is interesting. And so there are just different ones of those. And so on. And you also have some type of resonances on the D section, but those are more inspired by drum type resonances. So like a drum head would ring, for example. So here is most likely the best section for creating drum sounds. And again, you can change a bit the resonances on the left side. And there's also one section more dedicated to tuned percussion, but again with some resonances. And also you can get some cymbal sounds, where you can also change basically how dark or bright it is on this left side. And some ring modulated oscillators that again, it's a little like the FM thing, but here it sounds a little less intense. But also great for creating some sound effects. So for this example, we're just going to pick some of those drum sounds. Maybe this one. Make it a little duller, because let's just try to get some kick drum out of this. But now there's no real shape to the sound. You just hit it and nothing sounds exciting. And that's where the decay is important. And we're using the decay first because usually there's the filter first, but I want to show you the decay because that one is really important for how long your sound is. Because if you see, if I increase the decay, it goes really long, but if I decrease it, it gets really short, which is more something that you want to have. At least this type of attack for drum sounds makes them more punchy. And you have some different types of decay because E stands for exponentially, and you have 3 different ones of them. And they all have some exponential curve, but with different types of intensity. So you can see here that it rings still a little longer. Well, the higher you go, the quicker it descends. The shorter it gets, so E3 would be the kind of snappiest of all those 3 ones. Then you also have linear, so it's not this exponential thing, but just some linear descendants, which gives you just generally more decay. You don't have this kind of punch, but there's also a punchy setting, which increases even the attack, as you can see here. Sometimes it can sound a bit over the top, but if you're really looking for something punchy, then you can experiment with this. And then you have some custom type setting for the decay, which is really interesting because here it reacts to the velocity. And so as soon as you're in this number area on the right side, you can think of the left side is the decay once you play loudly with a high velocity. And on the right side, it's kind of the decay when you play with the low velocity. And just to show you some extreme example, if the decay on the right side is really high, and if I play with a very low velocity, it's very long. But as soon as I play harder, it's very short. So you can get some interesting settings here depending on what you play that reacts on your velocity. And of course you can do it the other way around. So the louder you play, the longer the decay. And that's kind of some interesting setting to play with. I'm going to switch back to E3 though, because I want to have this kind of short sound. So then we can move to the filter, and it has different functions depending on what sound you use. So for those analog waveforms, for example, it just emulates a typical filter of a synthesizer or a subtractive synthesizer. So the higher the value, the brighter the sound. But for those other sounds, it's more like a change of the timbre. And so we can see what happens here if we play a bit with the frequency. So you get more harmonic content in this case, which I don't like so much for the sound, honestly. And on the right side, you have the dynamic filter, which basically is some filter envelope. And filter envelope means that there's some movement applied to the filter, because if this is on 0, we still hear a little snappy thing in the beginning. And it depends also on the type of sound you choose or the waveform in how strong this effect is. But it basically adds a little bit of movement to your sound and gives it a little more attack in just adding some movement to the filter. But here, actually, I like it. Maybe just a tiny bit of this harmonic content, but I don't need more of it. It's a good thing to learn, though, to just change between those things while you're editing your sounds, because now let's use one of those analog waveforms. So for example, here we have some sawtooth wave. And let's see what happens if the dynamic filter is fully opened, but the frequency is at the lowest value. You see that we still get some snappy first attack, which is because there's some filter envelope that opens the filter shortly in the beginning before it brings it down to the amount on the left side. But if the dynamic envelope is not activated, we just get the kind of dull sound. So you always need to navigate between those things. Then in the bend section, you can apply some pitch envelope in the beginning, which means that the pitch will slide down from some higher value. And let's make some very drastic example. So you hear it creates this pew pew type of sound, and if you, with the lower parameter, increase the length, you have a longer movement of it, as you can see. Which sounds really weird then, unless you want those type of space sounds. But usually a little bit of it can just increase the punchiness. And you have to play around again depending on what waveform you're using and also how your filter setting is. But you can see that here it really adds some punch to the sound. And a little goes a long way usually. And then the last setting of the tone section is the pitch. So here you can just change the pitch and find out where the sound sounds the best to you. So for a kick drum, I would probably go to some lower tone. And then again, because now it lost a bit of the punch, try to see if I can increase it again, for example, with the intensity of this bend. Maybe also yeah, so you see, you always have to go back and forth to just fine-tune your sound. But if you do it a few times, it becomes kind of organic. And also in the beginning, it feels fiddly to always press this button on the left side, but you'll get used to it. And then there's a fun section below, which means like SCL means scale. And if you're in this mode where you're editing all pads, you can then, after editing the sound, apply a scale to them. So they automatically are played in a specific scale. And I'm going to demonstrate this with another drum kit. So let's save this one. And by the way, if you want to save a drum kit, you just go to Shift and Store Kit. And then here it blinks and you have to select where you store it. But usually it's the space where you're already at, unless you want to create some set lists. Then this way you can also just create the order of your kits. And then you just press it again. And exactly the same would work for the drums, because you can go to Store Drum, and now it gives you, for example, this user interface. You can't override those preset drums. So here you can just pick the one you want to store it at, and let's say I want to store my drum at user interface 2, and you can do it here. So that's how you save stuff. And so now I move to F23. So I have this again, and let's say this is the sound we created because it's just for demonstrating purposes. Now I go to Edit All Channels, and now I go to Scale. So now I have to press the lower parameter, and right now there's no scale applied, but you see SC here on the left side. And now if you turn the knob once, you have, for example, this scale, which is kind of cool. And then you have different ones. And those are just some major or minor scales. You have some pentatonics, which are scales consisting of just 5 notes. Here you have some minor modes, which are also really interesting. So it's really inspiring because you can quickly create melodies without having any idea of what's theoretically going on here. Augmented, it's a kind of crazy scale. Very dark, blues. If you're into this. And yeah, those are the different types of scales. So it's also very fun to play around with and just come up with some actually melodic sounds. By the way, you're also warmly invited to check out a class I made for Skillshare about learning drums, particularly with some small electronic drum pad. And there's a link down below in the description where you can register on Skillshare 1 month for free without any strings attached. Just try the class and see if it's for you. Nevertheless, let's get back to our F22 demonstration kit and have a look at the noise section, because one drum sound consists of different parts. You have the tone and the noise. Like, those are the main parts, and you can also add some tiny attack. We'll look at it in a second, but noise and tone are basically the 2 main elements you're dealing with. And by default, the noise is off. So you see, if you click on Mix and Noise Level and Tone Level, you can change this, and noise level you can bring in without actually pressing the lower parameter. And if I do this, you see that the noise comes in, which is set in this setting, and we're going to look at it now. I'm just going to bring it up a little so we can hear it. And for the noise, you also have different types of filters because they represent different types of frequency content. And let's just listen to them. So you see, this one has more high content than this one. Still, they are kind of low pass filters, which means they cut away some high frequencies. then this is, the B is for band pass, which means it's just one part within the frequency spectrum where it focuses on, but cuts off both some low end and some top end. And then we also have some high pass content, which means it cuts off some low end. So here they might sound a bit brighter. But you always have different types of filter slopes. Let's go with one of those low pass ones. And then you can also add some resonance, which means it emphasizes some type of frequency where the filter cuts off the content. You get this, which I don't like for this sound, but again, this goes into the kind of electronic space direction, and you can really quickly get those sounds by playing a bit with the noise resonance. Sometimes you can add a little bit to just make it a little more emphasized. Again, a little goes probably a long way here, but you have to experiment for yourself. And then again, you have the same thing that you have already in the tone section, like the filter section, because it's exactly the same. There's the dynamic filter, because right now the frequency is at 0, so we only hear this kind of movement because the dynamic filter is applied, and if I take it off, we don't even hear it because it's so low, it's filtered so much. And it comes in here. But again, it's actually good to have the frequency very low and then just dial in the dynamic filter so you have some punchy result. And then again, let's see what we can do with the decay. It's exactly the same setting, apart from you also have a G section, which means gate. And gate is just once you hit the note, it opens and then it goes down immediately, so there's no envelope or decay. And in addition to the noise, you can also bring in some click. So there are different click sounds, and you can choose between the different ones with the lower parameter setting and dial in the volume on the left side without pressing anything additional. So especially for kick drums, this can help make your kick drum cut through, because if you only use the tone content, it's easily going to be buried underneath the other sounds that you're using. And so we can check those different types of sounds. I like those actually. They are not very obvious, but make our sound a little more punchy, although it's too much of it already. And just so you know, N stands for noise, so it's basically some additional noise generator if you use a click sound like this. P are just like short pulses, and I found them a little less offensive, which is usually good. Those are also short pulses, but with a little less low frequencies, so they are high passed. And those C sounds have a little more tone, or this kind of chirpy character. Then for every sound you can edit some EQ. And on the left side you see the part on the frequency band where you're EQing it, and on the right side you can either boost or cut frequencies. So for example, if I boost now, you see that if I move around at the frequency spectrum, so now we're at the bottom end of the frequency spectrum, and now we're boosting some higher part of the frequencies. Maybe it wasn't obvious enough. But I'm usually kind of careful with this EQ and do things inside my DAW after recording the sounds. And also you can add some distortion, and there are 3 modes. There's like drive, for example, which will just basically saturate your sound. And sometimes it also changes the decay. So maybe you want to have the sound more saturated, but then decide to shorten the decay, which I would do in this scenario because I kind of like the aggressiveness that it added. But then you also have the sample reduction mode. It basically reduces the audio quality or the bit rate. But sometimes this is exactly what you're looking for. And there's one more mode, which is the ring modulator. And on very small values, you can add some little vibrato, so change of the pitch to the sound. And you have to have some long decay to hear it. So see it wobbles around, but then you make it faster. And at some point, you get some interesting overtones. But yeah, here I like the distortion the most, and so I'm just going to go with some drive, adjust the decay, and yeah, this kick drum, just for demonstration purposes, is kind of cool. You can also add some reverb to the individual sounds, but it has to be turned on here, because on the right side you have the reverb section. Right now it's on off, and then you have different settings. So you need the lower parameter button, and there are just things like tiled room, P is played, R is room, and this is studio, I think, and there's also just hall. And so those are just different algorithms. Let's just use a played for now. And once you select something here, you can then, on the reverb setting for the sound that you selected, just send it into the reverb. It's not the most likely thing that you will send a kick drum into the reverb, although there are good examples of people who did it, but you need to have a good reason. And then here, once you have the reverb, you see that on the left side you change the sound of the reverb. The higher you go, the more high frequency content you have. Actually, a kick drum is not the best example because we don't have so many high frequencies, but you can see it gets super dark if it's turned down completely. So yeah, you can get some interesting effects this way. But I'm going to take off the reverb now and show you the delay, because there's also delay where you have two different types of settings, and there's the delay rate and the feedback. And the rate basically means at what tempo the delay is going to come in, and the feedback is how often it repeats. And I'm going to put the feedback to 0 because we don't just want one delay, and we have to also send it. So here we need the lower parameter button again into the delay. So here you hear, the lower this value, the longer it takes for the note to come. And if I increase the feedback, it repeats the sound more times. And at some lower tempos, you get some interesting rhythmic effects you can play with. And if you click on Shift and BPM, you can sync it to some metronome. So if you're playing to a click or you need it in some specific tempo, you can do it here. And so it starts at 60. Then this concept is a bit weird because you can dial it up until 179. Now it changes to 90 and has this weird sign on the left side, which means now it's on 8 notes, which is twice as fast as quarter notes here. And this is why it went to 90, because after 179 we would be at 180, and half of it is 90, but because it's now 8 notes, it's now just the next level. And the same thing happens again here, that it changes to 90 but in 16th notes. And yeah, don't worry if it's too complicated. Most of the time you'll not go faster than this anyway, I'd say. But yeah, at this part you basically have to double the tempo to have the actual tempo, and with the 2 stripes on the left side you even have to multiply it with 4. But for a bass drum I wouldn't use any of those. I would keep it clean, but just so you know how those things work. And if you're in the tempo menu, you can also tap the BPM with this button. So it's just when you press your finger in the tempo you want to have. This was it for all the sound parameters. Let's also have a look on what kind of other parameters you can change in terms of setting. So I've shown you that here you navigate. Then you have the mono group setting, which means that you connect sounds that kind of cause the other sound to mute once you play them. And I show you how this works. So if you want to add our first pad to the mono group, we just click Shift and mono group, go further. And we also want to have this pad on the mono group. And now you see, if I play this pad, usually the sound is kind of long, but if I then play this pad, it's cutting off this pad. So you can use this, for example, also for hi-hat sounds. If you use some open hi-hat and then you play the closed hi-hat pad, that it sounds realistic and the open hi-hat doesn't keep ringing although you close it, and those types of things. You can just undo it by, again, going to the pad, clicking Shift and the mono group. I've shown you the edit all channels setting. Then on the lower side you have a couple of more functions. So I didn't mention the level and pan yet. So here you just have the level of every individual pad. And on the other parameter, you can pan it. It's a good thing because the Nord drum only has a stereo output, but sometimes to give you some variety later, for example, if you're only using a kick and a snare sound, it's a good idea to send one of those sounds out on the left side and the other one on the right side, so you can actually edit them independently later. Just as a little tip. Those functions on the bottom you all access with the Shift button. So if I click Shift and this one, we're in the pad sensitivity menu, and it basically, you tell the pad how sensitive it reacts to your playing. So right now I can play it very softly. It already reacts. If it would be on 1, it would take me a while and also react way slower to my playing. And also the pad threshold is kind of a similar thing, because here you say at what point the pad reacts. So if I go to 20, I have to press it hard to get a response, and then it's also already on a value where it's loud. But if it's on 1, it reacts immediately. Then you have different pad modes, like ST is sticks, so like I right now play with sticks, but you can also set it to hand, and I think it's just a little more sensitive then. And if you click on it again, you're here where you also have some access to the pad response, and this is the most natural mode because we can play it with different velocities, but you also get some type of compression in those modes. Here you can already see that I play it softly, but it's way louder. So L1, 2, 3 are some type of compression modes, and the O1 and O2 modes are also some different type of reaction. Actually, this one is more sensitive again than those compressed ones, but this one isn't. Then you have the MIDI menu, and if you're interested in MIDI, I'm going to link some video here where I speak about how you can use the Nord drum as a MIDI controller, and I mention those settings. And there's also another video where I speak about using the Nord drum as some drum machine. I'll also try to link it, but yeah, for everything MIDI you should check those videos, because it goes far beyond the content of this video. Then you have the system menu, where this is just some mode where if you buy it, apparently sometimes there's some protection that no new drum kits can be written, but so you have to switch this on off if maybe you have problems storing your drum kits. And then there's the pad layout, and it has different pad layouts. Right now it's pad layout 2, which means that my kick drum is here, but if I would change, all of a sudden my kick drum would be here. And there's also a layout where it's here, and then here it should be here. And you can check the menu for the exact settings of the layouts, but this is more for also presets when you have some particular way of playing that you can, because the bass drum is always at some part and some snare in some other part, that you can quickly change this if you need to play some other things. You can also copy and paste some pads. So for example, if I click Shift and copy, and now I'm on my first bass pad, the kick drum, and now I go to the second pad and click Shift and paste. It pasted the kick drum here. So now I have it on both pads. And you can also swap pads. If you, again, let's swap, for example, this pad. We do the same, just Shift and copy. With, let's use this pad. But now we actually have to press Shift and both of those buttons. So now this one is here and this one is here. And one more setting I didn't mention yet is the pad follow option. So if you click on those two buttons, you see that here the slide flashes, and now if I play a pad, you see that this red button that shows us which pad we're editing is also selected. So this way you don't have to use those to navigate. So if you want to edit this pad, you just play it once and then you can start editing. But if you forget that this mode is on, you can also quickly mess with your sound. So you should just probably decide whether you want to use those all the time or have the pad follow thing, because otherwise you can confuse yourself very easily. And that was it for this video. Thanks so much for watching. Again, if anything remained unclear, just use the comment section and I'm always going to reply to any of your comments. Also, you're warmly invited to check out some performances that I made with the Nord drum 3P, so you can actually see this thing in musical action and not only in this demonstration mode. And there's a playlist where you can find all my Nord drum 3P performances here. Also, you're warmly invited to subscribe to my channel, because there's more content to find about the Nord drum 3P. And apart from that, I wish you inspiration with whatever it is that you create, and really hope to see you soon again at this channel. Bye!